One of music history's most beloved composers has hit rock bottom. The year is 1914, and Claude Debussy has hit the absolute worst point of an artistic and personal crisis which had been building up for years. His contemporaries Ravel and Stravinsky were stealing much more of the spotlight. His longtime benefactor had died in 1907, and instead of leaving even a penny to Debussy, left all of his money to the Pasteur Institute. But hey, at least we know stuff about bacteria now. And on top of that, in 1909, Debussy was diagnosed with the cancer that would ultimately take his life. And it was only getting worse. In order to make ends meet, Debussy had been concertizing around Europe like a madman. And because of all of his time spent touring on the road, he has little to no time to compose. Little did he know that it was all about to get even worse. Debussy's performing career is about to be rudely interrupted by World War I. And in the face of a global catastrophe, the likes of which he never could have imagined, Debussy began to ask himself if his compositional career was worth anything at all. For a long time, I must admit I am lost. I feel utterly diminished. The magician you loved in me, where is he? He's now just a sullen conjurer who will soon break his back in a final, graceless pirouette. He couldn't imagine how his music, so small and so frail, could have any positive impact on a world that was falling apart. And yet deep down he knew that he still had something important to say. A few months after the war began, in the summer of 1915, the city-loving Debussy escaped Paris for Pourville-sur-Mer. The sea was always important to Debussy, and here it revitalized him. It was here in this small seaside village where Debussy was struck with a tide of inspiration. Debussy's productivity in 1915 is incredible. It's as though he saw death coming, and instead of cowering in fear, he allowed his wildest and most grandiose ideas to come to fruition with a lifetime of experience behind him. He wrote the cello sonata, blanc and noir. And perhaps most importantly, at least for us pianists, he wrote some of his most profound and profoundly misunderstood piano pieces, the Études. And yet Debussy's Études went underappreciated for decades. They were often written off as being, at best, overly ambitious and overly intellectual, and at worst, being utterly incomprehensible. The Deux Études were intended as technical exercises. Few of these works are played nowadays. They are too dull. Musically, Debussy died at the beginning of the war. In some ways, the mixed response to Debussy's Études makes sense. Claude had never been afraid to go against the currents of what was acceptable, and the Études are the culmination of that. I have this feeling that Debussy's earlier piano music was more like trying to create an image or a poem or an elegantly written novel. Virtuosic, of course, beautiful, of course, but everything with a slight sense of distance, everything maybe placed on a stage and us clearly in the audience. The Études, on the other hand, are incredibly emotionally direct, as though Debussy is speaking to us in his own voice. And it would take an equally fearless, equally emotionally lucid performer to bring these works to life. In 1990, Mitsuko Uchida, a pianist known for her interpretations of Mozart and Schubert, would release her recording of Debussy's 12 Études. And she kind of set the world on fire with that one, honestly. This is just one of my absolute favorite recordings of any piece of piano music. Therefore, I have to acknowledge that perhaps I'm a bit biased, but I just adore this. I adore this so much. This was before and after, at least until 2025, her only recording of French repertoire. This shouldn't, however, be particularly surprising. Like Debussy himself, she's always been able to mix a sense of form and structure with joy and spontaneity and adventure. She's mastered Mozart, of course, but she's also not afraid to take on such beastly pieces as works like the Schoenberg Piano Concerto. And in her recording of the 12 Études, she emphasizes just how ambitious and vast Debussy's piano writing is. A vastness which honestly scared the composer himself. Debussy wrote, "In public, I'm struck by a peculiar phobia. There are too many keys, I don't have enough fingers, and suddenly I no longer know where the pedals are. It's sad and utterly distressing." Honestly, I suppose that sounds very familiar to most pianists who suddenly forget where middle C is when they walk out on stage. Uchida's also not afraid to do some rather unconventional things. She really exploits the full range of pedaling and voicing that she has available to her. For example, in the Étude sonorités opposées, Uchida uses subtle pedal changes to reveal the complex counterpoint that makes up these opposing harmonies. And she uses some very unique voicing to bring a certain glow in the upper register to the melodic material which is emphasized in the left hand. Virtuosic techniques like repeated notes are also particularly brilliant in Uchida's recording. And then there's movements like pour les octaves. Uchida sings through every fragmented phrase while maintaining crisp articulation that emphasizes a kind of Lisztian virtuosity. Her rubato feels improvisatory, as though she's taking the text off the page, internalizing it, and making it completely hers. This has none of the so-called impressionistic fog that we might associate with a generic recording of Clair de lune or even the Image. This is pure fireworks. When we listen to Uchida's recording, we realize that if Debussy's artistry truly did die before the war, then in its place was a phoenix who rose out of the ashes for one final flame of artistic inspiration. Of course, all of Debussy's works were pushing the piano forward in some way. It's just that the Études do that the most clearly of all, and Uchida's performance really helps us to realize that. It's no secret that the Debussy Études are incredibly technically demanding, and you're probably wondering, how in the heck would I even begin to tackle a piece like this? Well, a great place to start is with Tonebase Premium, the platform that makes videos like this possible. You can get started with a 14-day free trial by checking the link in the description below. On Tonebase, you'll find fantastic lessons from some of the world's greatest living pianists, including some of the most important interpreters of French music that are living today. These lessons tackle the music of Debussy, Ravel, and many, many, many more, with exercises and ideas that you can incorporate into your piano playing right away. Check the link in the description below to get started. In many ways, Debussy's Études, at once perhaps his most intellectual and abstract pieces, are also his most personal. In them, Debussy reveals to us everything about who he was as a pianist, as a composer, and as a person. We know that during Debussy's financial crisis, he was working on editing new editions of older pieces. One of these projects was a new edition of the Chopin Études, which of course Debussy then was spending a lot of time with, and it's no doubt that the Chopin influence is seen very clearly in Debussy's own Études. But Debussy takes it to the next level, integrating almost 100 years of technical and musical developments. For example, let's compare Debussy's Thirds Étude to Chopin's Thirds Étude. Chopin's Étude is hard enough, but in Debussy's, the difficulty is not just about the technical challenge of the thirds, but about controlling the harmony, switching from textural playing to melodic phrasing. And while these Études are frighteningly difficult for any pianist, they're also each kind of a compositional challenge for Debussy himself. Let's take the Fourths Étude, for example. Fourths are thematic, fourths are gestural, and Debussy uses his keen sense of counterpoint to turn fourths into a sophisticated harmonic landscape. Not to mention, of course, that fourths are extremely awkward to play at the piano, so we have our own technical challenges to deal with there as well. The Fourths Étude honestly reminds me so much of The Girl with the Flaxen Hair. It's like the girl grew up to become sort of a Lara Croft-style action hero. La Giesefication de Fil le Chevaux de Lune. Chopin wasn't the only legendary influence on these pieces. Debussy was long interested in finding a compositional style that was more authentically French, and to do that, he searched for inspiration in the past. The French Baroque composer François Couperin became a beacon of light to Debussy. He was someone who laid the groundwork for a uniquely French style of keyboard writing. In fact, Debussy was thinking of dedicating the 12 Études to Couperin until he finally decided to dedicate them to Chopin instead. To my ear, I also hear the inklings of non-classical influence. It's no surprise that Debussy was such an inspiration on many generations of jazz musicians who followed him. And these etudes also had a lot of resonance for the composers who were to follow Debussy. They were a model for how a composer could push the piano and the pianist as far as possible. The composer Andrei Bukareshvili wrote about Debussy's etudes. Reading the score, playing it, however imperfectly, listening endlessly, one tries to imagine this ailing man at the end of his strength, dreaming and creating these sounds at some wretched table in Pourville. Herculean strength of that other self, soaring above the daily self. And it might be a bit of a stretch, but I think I can hear a little bit of the same spirit of transcendence in his etudes. Debussy understood that etudes are an exploration of a pianist's most intimate act, the act of studying the instrument and of developing craft. He pays tribute to that in pieces like his wonderful etude for the 5 fingers after Czerny, in which it's almost like a student who is forced to practice Czerny begins daydreaming about being on stage and improvising in front of millions. Debussy was so committed to the idea of a pianist creating their own relationship with this piece that he elected not to include any fingerings in his edition of the piece. The exception to this rule, however, is the short footnote he adds to his etude for the 8 fingers, in which he advises the pianist not to use their thumbs at all. And there's actually a really important piece of trivia that I want to add here, which is essential for anybody who might be thinking about learning this piece. Even though Debussy didn't want you to use your thumbs, apparently Marguerite Long, who was one of the people who premiered his etudes in the first place, she actually convinced him that using the thumbs in that piece created a more interesting sonic result. Debussy was completely fine with that, and that's actually the approach that Mitsuko Uchida also takes in this piece. The premieres of the etudes were done rather haphazardly in bits and pieces, some in the United States and some in France. Marguerite Long was, of course, one of the people who premiered a small chunk of them. But having played a couple of these etudes myself, I really can't even imagine what it must have been like for the first pianists who tackled them. I mean, they are just so incredibly musically sophisticated and crazy in a way that had just not been done before, especially in Debussy's works. And of course, Debussy deteriorated quite rapidly in his final years. This big productive wave of music would be his last really notable period of composition. Besides, of course, his very, very final, actually last piano piece, which was actually lost for many, many years. We have a video about that one, which you should check out if you're interested. But all of that to say, the etudes had a rocky start in a war-torn Europe and with pianists who didn't really understand what to do with them. It took a really long time for them to find the audience and the appreciation that they truly deserved, and Uchida's recording takes quite a bit of credit in doing that. Of course, there were a handful of very good recordings before Uchida as well. Incredible pianists like Pollini, Gieseking, and notably Paul Jacobs, they made recordings of these pieces which I know have big fans out there, and they are very good. But to my ears, and in my opinion, and I think many people share this thought, they're all marred by something. They're all a bit inconsistent, whether it's somewhat spotty recording quality or somewhat difficult technical smudginess in some places, or even just simply not taking it as far as it could possibly go. These are things which I think Uchida's recording does marvelously. I mean, it's perfectly recorded, her technique is flawless, and then musically, she just pushes these pieces so far outside the boundaries of what you would think is even possible. And I think one of the most obvious places we can hear this is in my personal favorite of the 12 etudes, Pour les accords. Uchida's version is just so fearless, so personal. so breathtaking. It's just something that not just any pianist could accomplish. A common idea about these pieces is that they're too dry or too intellectual to be really appreciated. But in Uchida's recording, we hear that while they are extremely difficult and virtuosic and sophisticated, they're also incredibly emotionally resonant. Remember how Debussy had been experiencing an artistic crisis, how he had been feeling as though his music had no relevance in a rapidly declining global situation. I think we can look back on these pieces and say with confidence that his fears were unfounded. Unfortunately, it wasn't something that he ever really got to experience, but obviously Debussy left such an indelible mark on piano history. He's a composer who can be with us for our entire lives, from the beginner and intermediate time when we're playing Clair de lune to the brave pianists who decide to tackle these etudes, and everything in between. In my opinion, dare I say that the Etudes and Uchida's recording may well be both Debussy and Uchida's most incredible contributions to piano history. As one commenter once wrote, "Is that Clippy? It's mortifying how perfect this piece is." As always, I really find it helpful to go back to Cortot when I'm thinking about the composers of this period, because he seems to summarize things in such a beautiful way that I think gets to the heart of what makes this music so special. About the 12 Etudes, he writes, "From each of these academic arguments, Debussy extracts such a diversity of effects, so ingeniously employs the musicality of these interval sequences or deliberately identical formulas, and develops them with such independent writing and a keen sense of the piano's natural poetry that, far from seeming to solve a specific problem, these etudes, one after another, give the impression of translating, without rigidity, an inspiration that could find no more natural mode of expression." These etudes plant Debussy into the pantheon of music history, and Uchida herself translates these inspirations for us, the listener. And that's what I think great music does. It allows for a conversation between the composer, the pianist, and the listener, one that allows all of us to develop our own deep relationship to the music. Thank you so much for watching. It's such a joy to get to talk about one of my, honestly, one of my desert island discs. So thank you for letting me gush about it. I'm kind of curious, let me know in the comments below, can you think of another piece that is kind of so defined by a single recording? I feel like the Debussy Etudes are really, in my opinion, again, maybe I'm biased, but they're really they're attached to Uchida after that 1990 recording. I just don't think anybody has really been able to best that yet. I'm curious if there's any other examples that you can think of in the description below. Also, check out some of our recent videos. We've had some really fun deep dives. We talked about a list of the top 10 pianists that was made by The Guardian London. We've talked about McDowell's To a Wild Rose, a lot of really fun, interesting pieces and interesting recordings that I love sharing with all of you. If you're curious about upgrading your own piano knowledge, be sure to check out Tonebase Premium, the platform that makes videos like this possible. You can get started with a 15-day, oh my God. You can get started with a 14-day free trial by clicking the link in the description below. I'm Robert Fleitz from Tonebase, and I'll see you next time.